Hi everyone, my name is Mariah Rossell and I am a psychedelic integration counselor. Welcome to my series on preparing for your first psychedelic experience. So as a psychedelic integration counselor, my job is twofold. One, my job is harm reduction, and two, my job is to help people maximize their experiences, whatever they are. And so today we're going to talk about getting ready for your first psychedelic experience. So when we consider psychedelic experiences, there are three major things to consider: set, setting, and dosage. And so let's break those down a little bit. Set, this is going to be your mindset. How is your mindset going into this experience? Because this is going to be a major determinant in how your psychedelic experience is. Then the second one, setting. Setting is physically, where are you? Who are you with? What resources do you have available? And the third one is dosage. So how much and what substance are you taking? And so we'll explore each of these things in each of the videos. So this first one is going to be in general preparation. Video 2 in this series is going to be on mindset and goal setting. Number 3 in the series is going to be talking a little bit about the different substances that exist and pros and cons and just some basic information. As a counselor, I cannot encourage the use of any illegal substances, and so everything is going to be very factual and give you information so that you can make the proper decision for what you would like to do in your life. And then we will do a video on the experience itself. And then the final video in this series is going to be on integrating the experience. And that's really what I love doing and where I can come in and give a lot of good information. So when you first consider taking a psychedelic experience, some people put a lot of thought into this and other people don't. As with any intense experience, it is ideal that you have some level of preparation rather than just throwing yourself into this. Obviously, there are experiences of people getting what we call dosed, meaning that they had someone give them substances without their consent. It was not voluntary. And those are going to be a much more difficult experience to integrate and to go through, especially if you don't know that you took a substance until you were in the middle of that experience. And the reason people take psychedelics varies. Culturally, we can look at them throughout different cultures throughout time. You have things like ayahuasca that are used by the native people, the Shipibo in Peru. Peyote is often used by a lot of the North American indigenous peoples. You have DMT that comes from a toad, and the 5-MeO-DMT comes from the Colorado River toad in southern US, northern Mexico. And that has been used for a long time. Psilocybin mushrooms have been used by indigenous peoples for a long time. Peyote has mescaline in it, and so San Pedro also is a mescaline-containing cactus. It's a larger cactus, it's a lower concentration, and the ceremony around it is very, very different, and it's typically used because it grows in South America. Iboga is traditionally from Africa, although you'll find a lot of clinics in Central America and even Mexico that use that substance. The blue lotus flower is said to have been psychoactive. The ergot from in rye, which is attributed to the Salem witch trials, ergotamine is what creates it, and that is a related of lysergic diacid or acid. Then you have there's a number of questions about what hallucinogens were used traditionally in the Orient, culturally. and depending on the research, depends on which ones you'll read about there. And so there are lots of cultural uses of psychoactive substances used throughout the world. The Amantia muscaria mushroom was used by the Sami people in Siberia. So, we can keep going because there's so many different traditional uses of psychoactive, psychotropic medicines. And so you may be going to an actual indigenous ceremony. You also have a lot of people that are creating a new type of spirituality where they're using these substances in a sacred way, but they don't have a direct lineage of a plant medicine tradition that has been used for tens or hundreds of thousands of years. Then you also have a lot of people that are using these substances recreationally. Primarily that's going to be LSD, uric acid, or psilocybin mushrooms, potentially MDMA. It's not truly a psychedelic, but people will lump it into that category, so I'll include it here. DMT would be another one that is often used recreationally. And then you've had substances that, until we had some of the changes of the legislation in the 70s, that were used in psychotherapy. Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, was actually a big fan of LSD in helping people achieve their 12th step. And because the 12-step program at AA talks a lot about sobriety, they decided not to actually use that as an official part of the program. Then you have mushrooms being used. Psilocybin mushrooms were used. MDMA actually was used quite frequently before the illegalization. Now we have things like MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, is coming out doing research. And they are currently using MDMA to address PTSD with counselors. So it's actually people that take the MDMA in a clinical setting. As a regular therapist that does not have a certification through MAPS, I do not work with my clients under the influence of substances, but there are, right now, in the early 2018, we are in phase 3 of those MDMA trials, and I keep hearing of phase 1 and phase 2 trials with other substances. Johns Hopkins is doing a study with spirituality and psilocybin mushrooms. Psilocybin mushrooms are also being done with research with cluster headaches. There's a number of studies that are coming out looking at using ayahuasca and MDMA to treat alcoholism and addiction. I have heard of people wanting to start looking at using MDMA with couples therapy. And so right now it's illegal for the most part. There are, like I said, a few trials that are happening. However, if we look at the history of it, maybe about 50 years ago, then these were actually used in a professional setting. And then you have people that are just using them recreationally. Sometimes they're using them at festivals. However, unfortunately, because of the Rave Act, you're not hearing about harm reduction at festivals, because as soon as a festival has a harm reduction component, it opens up this door to the Rave Act to say, well, why would you have harm reduction, things like Zendo or Dance Safe, if these illegal substances aren't there? And when an event producer admits that a substance is at an event, even if they are not the ones that brought it, because usually it's the participants that brought these substances to these events, then it opens the producers up to the legislation of the Rave Act. And that puts a lot of liability on not only the producers, it can lead to seizure of land, seizure of material goods such as cars and money and all of those other things. And so we have this conundrum right now where we know that there are a lot of substances used out there in larger event settings, and we legally cannot have those conversations because people are afraid, and rightly so. And so this also brings up an issue of, if you're going to choose to take a substance, know what substance you're taking. DanceSafe offers testing kits. You can buy them through their website. I believe it's dancesafe.org. And so that way you can just take a little bit of whatever substance it is and test for purity. Because oftentimes if you're getting a substance, say in a pressed pill, it's going to contain a lot of other chemicals that you didn't intend to take. And then now we're coming out with a lot of new substances. So I didn't even talk about what are often called Shulgin's ABC drugs. So this is like 2CT7, 2CB, all the things that have a bunch of letters and numbers. A lot of these are Alexander Shulgin's brainchildren. And because of the way the laws work, it's not just these specific substances that are listed, it's these specific substances that are listed and anything that produces a similar effect, which makes them all illegal, although a lot of people think they aren't. And then because of the illegality, people try to be like, oh, well, it's not quite that, so it's not illegal. Well, yes, it's still just as illegal, and it's probably not as well researched. And so a couple years ago, there was a substance called 25I that came on the scene. And 25I has an LD50. So an LD50 means a lethal dosage at which 50% of people die. And this is huge because, at least in my research, I have not found a lot of your standard psychedelics to have an LD50. There are certain things like ayahuasca that actually have contraindications, particularly because of it being an MAOI and because it has impacts on your blood pressure and heart rate and things like that, that it can be very contraindicated with specific substances that you're taking. So your SSRIs, your blood pressure medication, any type of strong stimulants such as cocaine, MDMA, meth, things like that, they're actually chemically contraindicated. But it's not an LD50 in the same way that 25 is an LD50. It's not at this dosage it kills people. It's if these other substances are also present in the body. And then Iboga is also another very dangerous one. The statistic that I have been given from MAPS is that it's a 1 in 100 mortality rate. And so while Iboga has been taken out of the traditional context and is being used in a lot of medical clinics in Mexico, Costa Rica, Central South America areas, it's being done under the scrutiny of medical doctors who are watching the vital signs and all of these things, because it does have a very high propensity to kill people. However, the quasi-nice thing about Iboga is, and ayahuasca as well, is they're both so intense experiences. There's a lot of purging, there's a lot of discomfort, that they're not the substances that are typically being used recreationally. They're typically being used in a ceremonial capacity under the guidance of hopefully a very experienced guide. There's, lots of people that don't do lots of good things in this world, so I would like to say that most of it's being done under good guidance, and a lot of it is, and a lot of it's not. And the same thing with Iboga is because of the catatonic state that it can often put people in, where they really need babysat for days at a time. This is under supervision of somebody that's very familiar with this plant medicine. And so this is not what you're typically going to find people take in a party setting, in a festival setting, anything like that. And so we have, I already discussed, we have the traditional ceremonial uses. We have the medicinal psychological uses that have been legal at certain parts of time, and we're starting to have this psychedelic renaissance where they're starting to have research and come legal again. We have the use of them party club scene, festival scene, rave scene. And then the last one is that I find is kind of just like a personal interest. It's not really necessarily in a strict ceremonial container. There may be some aspects of ceremony that might go into it, but this is some friends that are like, hey, I feel like doing this and going on a hike. Or, hey, I'm going to do this and hang out at this really pretty Airbnb or VRBO or whatever they're going to be doing. And so in this course of these videos, I really want to prepare you a little bit for each one of these, but the big question that comes up to me to ask people when they say, I would like to do a psychedelic for the first time, is what is your goal? What is your intention? And we'll get into another video that's really focused on goal setting, intention setting, why you're doing this. But generally, what's the desire? Is it, I want to go have a lot of fun at an event? Is it that I want to explore my own consciousness? Is it that I have a question and I'd like to answer that? Is it I'm curious about this specific culture? And then you can get into these questions of, is it cultural appropriation? Is it buying spirituality, so to speak? Or is it being used in a beautiful way to share? Because sharing, there are a lot of indigenous cultures that are still using these substances in a ceremonial capacity that have the desire to share their knowledge, and it doesn't feel like cultural appropriation. And so these are all things to really consider. And then when you're considering it, and we'll go into this more in another video, who are you doing it with and what is their experience? And then are you going to be in a safe space? So what are your contingency plans, your emergency plans? So those are all things that you really want to consider. And then, as I keep mentioning, and I will keep mentioning through these videos, all of these substances, if you're using them in the United States, or most countries, are Schedule 1 illegal. It's a felony to buy, possess, consume, sell any of these. And so is your desire strong enough to confront the potential repercussions legally of procuring and using these substances? And then do you know what you're even taking? And that's going to be a really big one that I keep harping on throughout this entire program, because that's been one of the things that I have found as someone who works with people confidentially as a counselor, is that people don't always know exactly what it is that they're putting in their body. So they're told this white powder is this thing, but then they might have an experience that doesn't feel like anything they've had before, and if they didn't test that chemical first, they don't know what they're putting in their body. And that raises a lot of red flags for me, because as I mentioned earlier in the video, we're coming out with new research chemicals like 25I that have an LD50. And generally, psychedelics don't have a lot of physiological impact. They will change your perception of time, perception of temperature. However, psychedelics are not known for increasing heart rate and blood pressure. Again, iboga, ayahuasca, there's a couple of them that do actually have some profound physiological impacts. Whereas things like 25I, as some of those research chemicals that are getting sold to people, or they're getting mixed in with a little bit of maybe fentanyl or meth or MDMA, or we don't know. Now you have a physiological impact that if you have, I don't like to use the word bad trip, but this is a typical term that is used, but if you have a difficult psychedelic experience, might be a better term, and you don't know exactly what chemical is in your body, then it's really hard to know, are you just having a difficult experience, or is there a physiological concern? And we don't know if we don't know what substance you have consumed. And so that's why some organizations like Zendo, who does psychedelic harm reduction at festivals, will only take in people that know what substance they're on, and it is very specific substances that they will be comfortable with. Because say you had taken something like ketamine. Ketamine is not a true psychedelic, it's actually a dissociative. Some people may feel like they have visions on it, but it's not a psychedelic at all, but it can have really intense physiological impacts. And that's something where it's not just a need for keeping a safe space for you to come to center, come to ground. It's, are there actual physiological medical concerns? And that's a huge question. And so this is another reason why know what you're going to take if you're going to take it. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining in and signing up for this short little course, and stay tuned for the next video. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.